Have you ever found yourself caught in endless arguments with someone who just doesn't seem to listen? You try to make your point, but all they want is to win. It can feel like you're banging your head against a wall, right? But what if I told you that constantly engaging with these people isn't just frustrating, it's also wasting your time and energy? That's right. While you're busy defending yourself, they're busy changing the goalposts, throwing insults and refusing to listen. Stoic philosophy teaches us the power of choosing our battles wisely. After all, time is the most valuable thing we have. So, here's the question. Are you spending it wisely? Ready to stop wasting time on arguments that go nowhere? Stick around, because we'll dive into why these kinds of people aren't worth your time, and how to avoid getting dragged into their game. But before we dive in, pay attention to this story, which will help you better understand the wisdom in this material. The story of Alex. Alex was a man who valued logic and reason. He believed that every disagreement could be solved through discussion. If someone misunderstood him, he would explain. If someone criticized him unfairly, he would defend himself. He thought truth always won in the end. But life had other plans. At work, his colleague Ben constantly challenged him, not with facts, but with sarcasm and twisting words. Every conversation turned into a debate, leaving Alex exhausted. At home, his cousin Mike loved proving others wrong. Even over simple things like weather forecasts, Mike would argue endlessly, refusing to back down even when proven wrong. And online, strangers would attack his opinions. Alex tried replying calmly, but the more he explained, the more they mocked him. One day, after a draining argument with Ben, Alex went to a nearby park to clear his mind. There, he saw an old man feeding ducks by a pond. The man noticed Alex's frustration and spoke gently. "You look like someone who's been fighting a battle no one can win." Alex sighed. "I try to reason with people, but it's like they enjoy the fight more than the truth." The old man smiled and pointed at the ducks. "See those ducks? If you throw them bread, they'll eat. But if you throw stones, they'll scatter, quack loudly, and flap around. But notice, no matter how much noise they make, they never listen to you. They're just reacting." Alex nodded slowly. The old man continued. "Some people are like those ducks. They don't argue to understand. They argue to win. Their goal isn't truth. It's noise. The more you feed them your attention, the louder they get. But if you walk away, they're left quacking at nothing." Alex felt something shift inside him. The next day, when Ben made another sarcastic remark, Alex smiled, said nothing, and walked away. Ben looked confused. When Mike started another argument over a football match, Alex nodded, "Maybe you're right," and went to enjoy his coffee. Online, when a stranger mocked his view, Alex simply closed the app and took a walk. For the first time in years, he felt free. Some people don't seek truth, they seek conflict. They argue to dominate, not to understand. When you engage with them, you feed their chaos. When you walk away, you starve it. Remember, ducks quack, wolves howl, but the wise stay silent and walk their path. Don't waste your energy explaining to those committed to misunderstanding you. Before we begin with the first lesson, if you find these videos helpful, I encourage you to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated on the latest content. Let's begin. Number 1. They refuse to listen. Let's talk about one of the most frustrating and draining behaviors: people who refuse to listen. These are the people who don't engage in conversations to understand or learn, but instead, they just want to win. They don't care about the truth, the facts, or your perspective. They're only focused on being right. And when you're faced with someone like this, arguing is pointless. Here's the truth. They don't seek truth. They seek victory. These are the people who twist your words, interrupt you mid-sentence, and refuse to acknowledge any point of view but their own. They want to control the conversation, not collaborate. The moment you realize they're not listening, walk away. Engaging with them only feeds their need to be right, and you'll end up wasting energy, time, and mental peace that could have been spent elsewhere. Think of it like talking to a wall. Imagine trying to talk to a brick wall. No matter how much you explain, no matter how well you articulate your point, the wall stays silent. It doesn't change, it doesn't care, and it certainly doesn't listen. That's what arguing with people who refuse to listen feels like. You can shout all you want, but the wall won't respond. And that's how pointless it is to argue with someone whose goal isn't dialogue, but dominance. And this is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Zeno once said, "Better to trip with the feet than with the tongue." Think about that. Words are powerful, and once you engage with someone who refuses to listen, you risk losing your peace and wisdom. Arguing for the sake of winning isn't strength, it's weakness. True strength comes from knowing when to hold your tongue and when to walk away. I remember dealing with a person who would never listen to my side of the story. Every conversation was an argument to be won, not a chance to understand each other. One day, they interrupted me once again, not letting me finish a sentence. Instead of continuing, I paused and said, "I can see we're not having a conversation. We're having a battle." Their face froze, realizing that the game was over. I walked away, and from that moment on, I knew I didn't need to engage with people who only wanted to win, not understand. So how do you handle people like this? First, recognize when the conversation is no longer productive. If someone isn't willing to listen, don't waste your time arguing. Second, don't get caught in their game. A conversation is a chance to share and understand, not to score points. And finally, remember, your peace and energy are more valuable than being right. At the end of the day, arguing with someone who refuses to listen only drains you. It's better to save your energy for people who are open to growth, dialogue, and understanding. Don't waste time trying to win battles that don't matter. Number 2, they twist your words. Let's talk about one of the most manipulative tactics people use when they can't win a fair argument: twisting your words. Instead of engaging with your actual points, they deliberately misinterpret or distort what you say to suit their own argument. They'll take your statements out of context, exaggerate them, or just flat out misrepresent them, all in an effort to make you seem wrong. Why? Because it's easier to manipulate your words than confront the truth. Here's the truth. They don't want to understand, they want to control. When someone twists your words, they're not looking for clarity, they're looking for ammunition. They want to use your own statements against you, even if it means completely altering your original meaning. This kind of behavior isn't about seeking truth. It's about winning at all costs. And the worst part? Arguing with them only plays into their hands. They've already made up their mind, and anything you say will just be another opportunity for them to twist. Think of it like playing chess with a cheater. Imagine you're playing chess, and every time you make a move, your opponent rewrites the rules to their advantage. It doesn't matter how valid your strategy is, they're only focused on changing the game to make you lose. That's what it's like trying to argue with someone who twists your words. The moment they can't win fairly, they'll change the rules and make your every statement seem wrong. And just like that, the game becomes pointless. And this is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Plato once said, "A wise man speaks because he has something to say, a fool because he must say something." The wise don't engage in pointless arguments or waste their time defending themselves against falsehoods. If someone is twisting your words to serve their own agenda, it's not worth your time to explain or justify. True wisdom is knowing when to speak, and more importantly, when to stay silent. I remember a time when someone I knew kept twisting everything I said. I'd explain my point clearly, and they'd suddenly turn it into something I never intended. After a while, I realized they weren't interested in understanding me. They just wanted to be right. So instead of defending myself, I stopped engaging. I simply said, "I'll let you have the last word." And from that moment on, it was clear they couldn't manipulate me without my reaction. Sometimes silence is the best response to manipulation. So how do you handle people like this? First, recognize when they're twisting your words. If they're misrepresenting you, don't waste time explaining yourself. Second, stay calm and detached. The moment you try to fight back, you're playing their game. And finally, remember, your words are only powerful if you choose when to speak. At the end of the day, you don't owe anyone an explanation if they're determined to misunderstand you. Speak wisely, stay focused, and don't let anyone twist your words to serve their own narrative. Your truth doesn't need to be defended. It will stand on its own. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 3, they argue from emotion, not reason. Let's talk about one of the most unproductive and frustrating tactics people use when they can't make a solid point: arguing from emotion, not reason. Instead of addressing the actual issue or looking for solutions, they use anger, frustration, and manipulation to fuel the conversation. They don't care about understanding or finding common ground. They just want to provoke a reaction from you. And the moment they see your emotions rising, they feel like they've won. Here's the truth. Their goal isn't to solve anything, it's to get a reaction. People who argue from emotion don't seek the truth. They seek to make you emotional, to make you feel defensive or upset. Once they provoke you, they can claim moral superiority or twist the situation to make themselves look like the victim. And if you let your emotions take over, they win. Think of it like a flame and a match. Imagine a calm flame, gently flickering in the wind. But then someone strikes a match, igniting a spark in your direction. That's how they work. They don't care about the flame or the substance of the conversation. They just want to start a fire, something to distract, to derail, and to provoke. If you let that spark catch, it only leads to chaos. But if you refuse to engage, the fire dies out before it can grow. And this is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Epictetus once said, "He who angers you conquers you." Think about that. Emotions are powerful, but when you let someone manipulate them, you give them control over your actions. The best response isn't to match their anger or frustration. It's to remain calm, centered, and unaffected. That's real strength. I once had a situation where someone tried to bait me into an emotional argument. They kept bringing up past issues, raising their voice, and getting visibly upset, hoping I would react. At first, I felt the frustration building up. But then, I remembered something important. This wasn't a conversation. It was a test. Instead of getting angry, I simply took a deep breath and said, "I can see you're upset, but I'm not going to argue." The silence that followed was more powerful than any words could have been. By refusing to engage emotionally, I took away their power. So, how do you handle people like this? First, recognize the emotional trap. If they're trying to provoke you, understand that it's not about the issue. It's about getting you to react. Second, stay calm and composed. The moment you react emotionally, you give them control. And finally, remember that your peace is more important than winning any argument. At the end of the day, arguments fueled by emotion only lead to frustration and miscommunication. When someone tries to provoke you, stay calm, stay in control, and don't let them conquer your peace. Your strength lies in your ability to remain unaffected. Number 4, they refuse to admit when they're wrong. Let's talk about a behavior that often leads to endless frustration. People who refuse to admit when they're wrong. Instead of acknowledging the facts, they cling to their pride, even when the evidence is clear. It's not about truth, it's about protecting their ego. They'll twist the situation, ignore the facts, and deflect blame, all to avoid admitting that they were wrong. Why? Because admitting fault feels like a loss of power. Here's the truth. Pride prevents growth. People who refuse to admit their mistakes are closed off to learning and improving. They're so focused on being right that they can't see the truth, and as a result, they stay stuck in their beliefs and behaviors. Engaging with someone who won't acknowledge their wrongs isn't a conversation. It's an exercise in frustration. You're not learning from each other, you're just spinning in circles. Think of it like a locked door. Imagine you're standing in front of a locked door. You have the key in your hand, but the other person insists the door isn't locked and won't accept that it needs to be opened. The more you explain, the more they resist. No matter how many times you show them the key, they refuse to acknowledge that the door is locked. That's what it's like dealing with someone who can't admit they're wrong. They won't even entertain the idea that the solution is right in front of them. And this is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Epictetus once said, "It is impossible to learn what one thinks they already know." If someone believes they're always right, they're closing themselves off to growth and learning. No matter how much information you give them, they can't hear it, because their pride is blocking the way. True wisdom comes from the willingness to admit when you're wrong and learn from it. I once had a colleague who would never admit when they made a mistake. I'd bring up something they had missed or misunderstood, and instead of accepting it, they would argue, deflect, or just stay silent. It frustrated me at first, until I realized they weren't trying to understand. They were trying to protect their pride. So, I stopped arguing. I simply said, "I understand we see things differently, but here's the information." And instead of getting caught in an endless loop of correction, I moved on. Over time, their refusal to admit mistakes became obvious to everyone else, and they ended up isolating themselves. So how do you handle people like this? First, stop arguing. The more you try to convince them, the more their pride will resist. Second, let their actions speak for themselves. If they refuse to acknowledge the truth, it's not your job to make them see it. And finally, remember, your growth isn't dependent on their willingness to admit fault. At the end of the day, people who can't admit when they're wrong are stuck in their own pride. And while they stay locked in that cycle, you have the power to grow, learn, and move forward. Don't waste energy trying to convince someone who isn't open to change. Focus on your own path and let their pride be their burden, not yours. Number 5, they keep moving the goalposts. Let's talk about a frustrating tactic that can turn any conversation into an endless loop, moving the goalposts. These people don't care about finding a solution, agreeing on the facts, or learning something new. No matter how much evidence you provide, they'll shift the argument just enough to keep you chasing a new target. The goal is never to reach an agreement. It's to keep you on the defensive, never allowing you to win the discussion. Here's the truth. When someone keeps moving the goalposts, they're not interested in truth. They're interested in winning. They'll change the rules of the conversation, introduce new points that weren't part of the original discussion, or ignore the facts you've already provided. The moment you provide an answer, they shift the question. It's an endless cycle of frustration, and no matter how many points you make, they'll never allow you to reach a conclusion. Think of it like chasing shadows. Imagine you're chasing a shadow. The harder you run to catch it, the more it moves away from you. You can never catch it because it's always one step ahead. That's exactly how it feels when someone keeps moving the goalposts. You're running in circles, but the finish line is always out of reach. The only thing you're guaranteed to lose is your time and energy. And this is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Seneca once said, "The wise man is not swayed by the opinions of fools." That's the key. Don't let their changing arguments pull you into a pointless race. If someone keeps shifting the discussion, it's because they have no real desire to resolve it. They just want to keep you engaged in their game. The wise don't waste time arguing with people who are simply playing for the sake of winning. They stay focused on what truly matters. I once had a debate with someone who kept moving the goalposts. Every time I presented evidence or made a valid point, they'd shift the argument to something completely unrelated. First, it was about the facts. Then it became about personal experience. Then, when I addressed that, they changed the topic again. Finally, I stopped. Instead of continuing the back and forth, I calmly said, "I think we're going in circles. If you want to continue the conversation when you're ready to listen, let me know." And with that, I walked away. Their need to keep moving the goalposts was a sign that the conversation was never about finding truth. It was about them feeling in control. So how do you handle people like this? First, recognize the pattern. If someone keeps changing the subject or shifting their stance, they're not debating, they're manipulating. Second, don't get pulled into their game. Stick to the facts, and if they keep shifting, walk away. And finally, remember, some discussions are never meant to be resolved. If someone refuses to settle, it's not your responsibility to keep trying. At the end of the day, people who keep moving the goalposts aren't looking for truth. They're looking for control. Don't let them waste your time. Stay focused, stay firm, and remember that the only goal that matters is the one you set for yourself. If you've watched the video this far, don't forget to leave a comment with a "thank God" and give it a like if you enjoyed the content. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting videos. I hope you find inspiration in them and that we continue learning together. Thank you for your support. Number 6. They attack you, not your argument. Let's talk about a tactic that can quickly turn any conversation into a personal attack. When someone attacks you, not your argument. Instead of addressing the actual point you're making, they resort to insults, mockery, or belittling. They try to undermine you as a person, not the logic or facts you're presenting. Why? Because when they can't win on the strength of their argument, they try to weaken you emotionally. The goal isn't to discuss, it's to discredit you, to make you feel small so they can feel superior. Here's the truth. Attacking someone personally shows a lack of substance. When someone insults you instead of debating your point, It's a clear sign that they have no valid counter-arguments, so they resort to emotional manipulation. They're not interested in the truth. They just want to trigger a reaction and get you off balance. Engaging with them is a waste of time because it's not about logic anymore. It's about their ego. Think of it like a child throwing a tantrum. Imagine trying to reason with a child who's throwing a tantrum. Instead of explaining or engaging with you, they scream, shout, and throw things. You can't have a rational conversation because their behavior isn't about the issue. It's about their emotional reaction. That's what it's like when someone attacks you instead of your argument. The more you engage, the more you're feeding their emotional outburst, not addressing the actual issue. And this is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The best answer to anger is silence." Think about that. Silence is often the most powerful response. When someone insults you, instead of reacting, stay calm, stay silent. By refusing to engage with their anger, you take away their power. You don't need to defend yourself against insults. Your actions and your silence speak louder than any words ever could. I remember once having an argument with someone who didn't like my point of view. Instead of discussing the issue, they started calling me names and mocking my perspective. At first, I wanted to defend myself, to explain why I was right. But then I remembered the Stoic lesson. The best answer to anger is silence. So I stayed calm, took a breath, and said nothing. And you know what happened? They got frustrated. They tried to provoke me more, but without a reaction from me, their insults lost their power. In the end, they had nothing left to say, and I walked away feeling peaceful. So how do you handle people like this? First, recognize when the argument is turning personal. If they start insulting you instead of addressing your point, stop engaging. Second, remain calm and composed. Don't give them the emotional reaction they're looking for. And finally, remember, your worth isn't determined by their insults. Stay firm, stay grounded, and refuse to let their negativity pull you into their emotional game. At the end of the day, attacks on your character are a sign of weakness, not strength. The best way to deal with it? Stay silent, stay strong, and let your composure prove your point. Number 7. They argue just to waste your time. Let's talk about a pointless and energy-draining tactic that some people use, arguing just to waste your time. These people don't care about finding solutions. They don't care about the truth. They just enjoy conflict for the sake of conflict. They'll argue, nitpick, and drag out discussions, not to get anywhere, but to keep you engaged in an endless loop. Their goal isn't resolution. It's to keep you occupied, tied up in their game of words. Here's the truth. Some people don't want to resolve the issue. They just want to argue. They thrive on conflict, feeding off the energy of the disagreement. And no matter how much you explain, how many facts you present, or how reasonable your argument is, they'll never accept it, because the argument itself is their objective. They're not looking for understanding. They're looking to waste your time and drain your energy. Think of it like chasing your own tail. Imagine trying to catch your own tail, spinning in circles. No matter how fast you run or how hard you try, you'll never catch it. It's a useless, exhausting pursuit. That's exactly what it feels like arguing with someone who doesn't want to resolve anything. They're not interested in the solution. They're just pulling you around in circles. It's a futile chase. And this is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Theophrastus once said, "Time is the most valuable thing a man can spend." Time is precious, and engaging in pointless arguments only robs you of that precious time. Arguing with someone who doesn't want to listen is a waste of energy, and the wise know when to walk away, not to waste another moment on something that has no productive end. I once found myself in a discussion with someone who clearly didn't want to resolve anything. They just wanted to argue. No matter what point I made, they would twist it, push it further, and get me to argue about irrelevant details. At first I tried to explain, but I soon realized this wasn't about finding a solution. This was about keeping me in the conversation for their own amusement. So I stopped. I took a deep breath, smiled and said, "I think we're going in circles here. Let's talk when we can have a constructive conversation." And just like that, I walked away. That was the moment I realized, sometimes the best way to win is to refuse to play the game. So how do you handle people like this? First, recognize when the argument is going nowhere. If they're just wasting your time, don't engage further. Second, don't get caught in their loop. Stay focused on what matters and don't let them distract you with pointless debates. And finally, remember, your time is too valuable to spend on people who don't want to have a meaningful conversation. At the end of the day, arguing for the sake of arguing only wastes your time and energy. Walk away, stay focused on your goals, and let your actions speak louder than pointless words, because time is the one thing you'll never get back.